This new Hunter Strand build is a DPS god. You're going to be running around in endgame PvE, melting everything with your Strand Super, which I have to say is broken AF. Now your new Strand Super is going to be dealing a stupid amount of DPS to bosses, which you can actually use to solo one phase some dungeon encounters in the game, which is just crazy. This is most likely going to be patched or nerfed very soon, if not disabled completely before day 1 raid, so you'll want to make the most out of this build if you want to easily melt bosses in the game, even if that's doing things like the new time trial mission on Neptune, where you're timed to complete the mission in a certain time for triumphs. Now there are also other benefits to the build. It's not just purely focused on dealing damage with our super, so you'll always have your class ability so that you can infinitely suspend targets, which is your go-to for unstoppables. You're going to have infinite volatile rounds, which will deal with your barriers, and you're also going to use certain stun effects like overload rounds to stun overloads, as well as suppressing enemies, slowing them, and a bunch more. Honestly guys, I've seen some crazy builds, but this thing is literally god tier. And the best part about it is that we're taking advantage of multiple effects and combining them together to just obliterate everything. Now guys, if you like this one, then a rating is much appreciated, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest and top tier builds. But now without further delay, let's get straight into the build. Now firstly, like every build video, if you enjoy this one and you want to see more top tier builds like this, then be sure to check out the new Season 20 class build playlist, which you can find linked down below. But with this one today, you're going to be able to cause insane damage with your super ability using the new Strand Threadrunner Subclass, and I wasn't actually a fan of the Hunter Strand during the campaign, but now that we have access to all of the new aspects and fragments, we can start to make this build more powerful than it already is. Now I have two variants to this build, and I will leave dim links down below, but variant 1, you're going to get insane super DPS buffs, which will melt bosses down quickly, and variant 2, you're getting faster movement in general, as well as extra damage resistance for survivability, using the new exotic helmet that tagged along with Lightfall. So you can choose which setup you prefer or go your own route, but I will go through those setups in just a moment. But firstly, before we do, let's just check out how this build is actually used first. So you're going to start by getting some orbs of power to access the armor charge system. This can be done using Cypher mods or your melee attack, and then picking up that orb will give us 2 stacks of armor charge each. Using your melee, you can generate tangles that you can throw for extra ad clearing, but the main part of this build is to use our class ability to jump and then slam to the ground. This is going to suspend enemies, and then killing those suspended enemies will give us class ability energy. Now as long as you have armor charge stacks and you suspend at least 3 enemies and kill them, you're going to get your class ability back instantly the majority of the time, so it's infinite suspending abilities that you can use. In endgame PvE where you're capped under the recommended power level, it might be slightly harder to kill ads, but you can make use of some of the fragments we have to help out with that issue, so that regardless of the activity we play, we're going to be able to consistently get that ability back to use with almost a 100% uptime. There may be some occasions where you might not always get it back, but that will only happen if you don't have armor charge stacks and you don't suspend and kill at least 2 or 3 ads at a time. But even if that does happen, we're using other mods and such to make up for any lost ability energy to make sure that we get it back quickly. Now if you go the damage resist route, you'll want to use the grapple grenade ability so that you can grapple around, and the reason for this is because we're using the new exotic helmet. I'm not even going to try and pronounce this, but this will give us woven mail when activating the grapple, as well as increased flinch resistance while woven mail is active. And if you don't know what woven mail does, it basically gives you a damage reduction to any incoming non-precision damage, and then using the fragment Thread of Transmutation, our weapon final blows will create a tangle while we have woven mail, and then we can use that tangle for more ad clearing. Now you might think that since we have a cooldown on the grapple, but it's going to be useless most of the time, but actually that's not the case, because using the Widow Silk aspect, we not only get an additional grenade charge for that extra grapple, but those grapples create a grapple tangle, which means we can keep swinging to that grapple as long as you have the other grenade charge ready, and therefore refreshing our woven mail timer to get that damage resistance, and then being able to create more tangles infinitely with our weapons. So it's a really good option to go with if you need more survivability. But the other route I prefer is to have the increase to super DPS and having the ability to suspend ads infinitely. By the way, the mods and stuff used in both variants of the build are the same, so the only difference is the exotic armor and the grenade ability. So for what I think is the best setup for this build, I'm using the new Strand Subclass with the Gambler's Dodge. We're actually not going to make use of this dodge, so you can use what you want here. We then have the new Threaded Spike melee, and what this is going to do is sever enemies, which will just mean that if we kill and add with that melee, it will create another tangle that we can use to either shoot or throw, which is pretty nice. And as we're running the heavy-handed mod in the arms armor, that melee kill is going to create an orb of power. And that orb we pick up is going to give us an armor charge stack, which I'll get to in just a moment. But that same orb that we pick up will also give us class ability energy, since we're using the insulation mod in the leg armor. And on top of that, it's also going to give us volatile rounds to avoid weapons. And bear in mind that I'm using the funnel web, which is a really good weapon for killing minor adds quickly. So that will now have volatile rounds when we pick up an orb. But what makes this even better is that while we have volatile rounds, we'll be able to stun barrier champions. Now you might think that, well, one orb from one melee isn't going to last long, which you're right, which is why in the helmet we're going to run the Void Cipher mod so that we can generate an orb on every multi-kill, which is 2 kills quickly using the funnel web or any void weapon. And with the Shattered Orbs perk in the artifact, we'll create even more orbs when destroying void shields with that same weapon. And if you have a lot of enemies like those taken with void shields, then it's literally going to rain orbs. Now the only issue with having volatile rounds is that we might not be able to stun overloads using overload rounds, so to counter this we'll instead use slow effects, which will be from my Deliverance, as well as suppression effects from my heavy weapon. So Deliverance, or any weapon that has the chill clip perk, this will stun overloads, and it will also stun them instantly. And then for the heavy weapon I'm using a tractor cannon, so this will weaken enemies and bosses, but also suppress them, therefore stunning overloads too. Unstoppables, we're going to use Strand right, so back to the subclass, we'll have the Shackle Grenade. So if you're not using the first setup with the grapple, then using a Shackle Grenade will stun Unstoppables by suspending them in the air. And regardless if you don't use this, our aspect, the Ensnaring Slam, will also suspend them and stun Unstoppables. So we'll have all 3 champions covered with this build, which is just perfect. Now the first aspect, Widow Silk, this will give us an additional grenade charge. Then the fragments, the only 2 you actually need are the Thread of Transmutation for the extra tangles, and Thread of Mind so that we get class ability energy when killing suspended targets. This is 100%, you do want this one on if you want infinite class abilities. And if you want to make this build even better, then you'll want to run the Thread of Continuity so that all those effects last even longer, giving you more time to kill them in harder content. Now just going back to the exotics, as I mentioned, if you want to use the new one for Woven Mail and Grappling, then you can use that one. But for this build, I'm personally going with the Star Eater Scales, and what this does is give us additional super energy from orbs, so it's faster supers, and when our super is full, picking up orbs will overcharge that super, giving us a healing burst, increased damage, as well as an overshield. And you want to grab 4 orbs before casting it to make the most out of that damage boost. And guys, using this exotic paired with Tractor Cannon to weaken bosses, you're going to be dealing insane damage. I can see this being massively nerfed, so while it still works, make the most of it. But I am also going to point out as well that the super is still really good without Star Eater and Tractor, so you don't need to have them, but it just makes them better than it already is. And I'm pretty sure you can deal somewhere around 600 to 700,000 damage, it's just crazy. Now we are going to be using mods with this build, and the only ones you really need are the Void Siphon in the helmet, or any siphon for the weapon that you're using, then a heavy-handed in the arms to generate orbs on melee kills, as well as the Focusing Strike to reduce class ability cooldown at the same time. Then in the chest you want a charged up to hold 1 extra armor charge stack, and then your damage resist mods. Then in their legs we have stacks on stacks so that you get 2 armor charge stacks for every 1 orb, as well as some class ability cooldown mods. Then lastly for the class armor, you're going to want 2 utility kickstart mods. If you can go with 3, then go with 3, because anything that will get your class ability back quicker is what you want on, as we are primarily a class ability suspending build, as well as getting more DPS with our super. This here is my artifact setup. You mostly just want the overload rounds for your Void SMG, the Shattered Orbs perk, Volatile Flow, and the Bricks from Beyond, so that we can generate extra heavy ammo using void weapons on powerful enemies. Other than that, I'll just get your mobility stat to 100, as well as resilience if you can, but with the resilience changes, I'd say having about tier 8 or 9 should be fine, and then you can focus the other stats as a priority, like mobility and strength. So overall, this build is probably one of the best Hunter Strand builds right now in the game when using the Strand subclass this season, especially for boss DPS and having the suspending abilities. So I'd use this build in all types of content, especially endgame PvE, if you want to easily melt down bosses and champions and keep them suspended, which by the way, the suspend effect also works on barriers, because while they're suspended they can't actually put up the barrier shield, so you can just melt them down while they're currently suspended without having to use barrier rounds on them. Either way, a really good build to use right now, but if you don't like this one and you want other build choices, then be sure to check out the playlist down below for more top tier builds in Destiny 2 Lightfall this season, for Season of Defiance, as you might just find your new best build. But for now, give this one a try and I'll see you guys very soon for the next build. Peace out guys.